Welcome back to another episode of GovCast. I'm your host, Isaac, joined by my co-host, Isaac and Felix. Today we're diving into education, and to help us explore it, we have a very special guest, Fayette County Public School Superintendent, Dr. Liggins. Before we bring Dr. Liggins on, let's talk a bit about education and where we are today. Felix, you did some research on education. What can you tell me about it?
Education was present for a very long time, especially higher education. Rich families or, throughout the history of Europe, mostly rich families or families in the nobility would send their children to get educated, have scholars write books for their children in order to have them educated. But that didn't really affect the common people until the early to mid-colonial period, when the church started expanding into more public education with Sunday schools and things like that. And then eventually that became that rich families who didn't have, a ton of money, but they still had more money than the average person, would send their children to a local school, and they'd still have to pay, or they would have somebody stay at their house and teach their child. Mm-hmm. That eventually expanded into smaller, cheaper regional schools. And in the late 1700s, there was a large push from a lot of people in the public to have at least very early education be included as a public forum, right? A public institution, I should say.
Okay. So public education was a bigger push in late 1700s. Mm-hmm. What was the big push for it?
There was a lot tied in there. I mean, that was when we were having a Revolutionary War, effectively Civil War, but yeah. A Revolutionary War where we broke off from the, colonial forces that were, of course, originally brought everybody over here, but also had become quite unpopular by that time. And that, to a lot of people, education represented how the rich kept ahead, especially with it slowly trickling down, the availability of education from the very upper class to, upper middle class eventually. It, to a lot of people, became a sign of freedom to have public education.
Well, now we move on to modern education and modern systems, from bringing bills from Kentucky legislation into education now. Isaac, what can you tell me a little about that?
Senate Bill 19 has been introduced and proposes introducing a moment of silence in schools. This, at one point, specifically mentions the Lord's Prayer. However, later on goes into saying prayer and meditation and is a little more broad. So we were curious about how that may impact schools. This same bill also talks about setting aside an hour every year for the students to go outside of the school building and talk about morality. However, it's very unclear on the definition of morality.
Thank you very much. We'll be right back with Dr. Liggins to discuss more about education and education in Kentucky. Now let's welcome our guest, Dr. Liggins. Dr. Liggins, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
Dr. Liggins, you've had quite a journey from Texas to Kentucky. Can you share a bit about your background and what led you to become the superintendent of Fayette County Public Schools?
Absolutely. Well, I started out in education as a classroom teacher. I actually started out as a high school English teacher in Fresno, California. That's where I went to college. And I'm originally from Texas. Texas is home, but I left East Texas, went all the way to California to go to college. And while there, majored in education and English. And I later graduated and then became a high school English teacher. And I really thought throughout my career I was going to become an English professor and then do the whole college higher ed route. But while in college, I actually ended up having my senior year, had a son, and then came back to Texas after teaching a couple of years. And got to Texas, I had become bilingual in Spanish. I studied abroad while in high school, while in college, and had become bilingual in Spanish. And so went back home to Texas, and Texas has a dual language program where all kids who do not speak English in their home language, their first 6 years, all the way until 5th grade, learn in their native language. And so there's a large percentage of kids who needed Spanish teachers at the elementary level. So I ended up going all the way from high school English all the way to elementary 3rd grade, where I taught in Spanish. All the content that you teach 3rd graders: math, writing, language arts, and all of that. But anyway, did that. Then I became the assistant principal at the same campus. Then I became a principal at the elementary level. Then I switched. I was in the Dallas area where there's lots and lots of school districts. And then I became a middle school principal a few years after that in another district. And then a few years after that, became a high school principal. And then I went on to become a superintendent in a district. And I was enjoying the district where I was at in Texas and having a great time. And there's organizations that school boards hire. School boards, if you may or may not know, are just citizens, they're citizens. They don't necessarily have to have a educational background. But the school boards are the people that your parents and all the voters vote to hire a superintendent. And the superintendent is the one with the educational background. And so what boards will do, because you could be a doctor, an attorney, an office worker, or anything, and be on the school board and not necessarily have any school experience. So they usually hire a firm, which we as superintendents, we call them headhunters, to find a superintendent. And so I got a phone call one day that said, we've been watching your background and some of the things you're doing there, and we think you'll be a great fit for this school district in Kentucky. I'd never even come to Kentucky, but I had this stereotype in my head about what Kentucky was. And unfortunately, it wasn't a bad stereotype. And I was like, nah, I'm good. And they were like, no, you should really come check it out and all that. So I actually visited the city, and I was like, wow, this is, it's crazy how ignorance and stereotypes will put you in a place where I was at that time. Really loved it here, really like the people, like the city. And so I said, okay, I'll throw my hat in the ring. And I went through the entire process, and I just kept going through the process, which was an extremely rigorous process. But ended up I really liked the fact that Fayette County had so many programs such as STEAM. I love the fact that Fayette County were doing some things differently throughout the state and a leader throughout the state in public schools. And I really thought that my skill set would match that, and that I could really continue to lead the district on. And we've done quite a few great things since I've been here. We are, it was during the pandemic when I came, and so we were able to come out of the pandemic successfully. Under my leadership, we've outperformed the nation as far as kids recovering from the pandemic, and we continue to outperform the state in our students' performances, thanks to you guys and all the hard work you do. So thank you for making me look good as a superintendent. But yeah, I'm really excited about my time here. It's been 4 years, and I just signed a contract for another 4 years. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So there has been an ongoing debate about the role of college preparation and just general involvement in public education. I was wondering what your thoughts were on that push to make college the primary focus for students, and do you think alternative pathways like vocational training are being adequately supported?
Well, there certainly is. Our goal as a organization, as a public school system, a P-12 school system, is to make sure that kids graduate prepared for anything, really. My goal is, whatever your wildest dreams are after high school, we should have prepared you while here in order to do that. College is certainly one of those options. I obviously took the college route and did that. But it is really, I think college nowadays is not as important to having a successful life as other alternative routes are. And so, in fact, you guys, you're going to hear it here first. I am looking to implement this coming school year. I've not even shared this with my leadership team, my principals, anyone. I'm looking to start a 4E initiative. And it's for our kids who will be graduating high school and where they're going. Because I do think that we need to have a focus not just on college. We need to have a focus on all of the options that our students have afterwards. And so those 4 E's are, first of all, enrolled, which is college. You can, when you leave, we want every kid to either be enrolled in a college program or preparatory program, or whatever program they'd like to continue their education in. We also will have the second E is enlisted, which is for the military, any of our branches of the military, to make sure that our students are prepared to be enlisted. The third E is entrepreneurship, because many students want to go off and, start their own business, and we should be able to make sure that we're preparing them for that. And the fourth E, my goodness, you guys caught me on the spot, is, what did I say? Enrolled, enlisted, entrepreneurship, and there's a fourth E. My goodness, I'm having a brain. There's a fourth E that is very important, and it will come back to me later. But goodness, this is quite embarrassing. But there's another E that has something to do with after college and how you're going to enlisted, enrolled, entrepreneurship, and I forget it. It'll come to me, I promise. But no, first of all, our kids need to have options. Students need to have options when they leave here. I do think education, college isn't for everyone. And we've seen many people that are not college graduates have gone off and done amazingly great things. We are focusing on many alternative routes here. I mean, we're opening up in this coming fall, a new and state-of-the-art career and technical education center to make sure that we're preparing our kids to have industry-recognized certifications, and so that they can leave with a variety of ways to just go get a job. That's the second E. That's the fourth E, employment. And they would be employed. I'm sorry. And so, so that's, it's really important to me that our kids have options once they leave high school and they have a route, whatever that is. And there shouldn't be any judgment. A college degree isn't necessarily any better than having a certificate to go out and be employed versus going to our military to serve our country or starting your own business. So really a big deal for me to have that as part of our overall plan.
But to go off that, I know as you're talking about the 4 E's, will there be other, are you hoping to do different academy, like STEAM Academy, how it's focused on dual credit, focused on project-based? Will be other ones where they're focused on maybe people going to college, focused on people being entrepreneur, people focused on those kind of things, different programs?
In fact, we already have what we call the Academies of Lexington at 3 of our high schools, and it prepares people for a variety of, there's a lot of pathways in there. We have health science where people can go into pharmacy tech, or students can go into nursing, or they can go into, we have the pre-engineering program that is in middle school and high school. So a variety of different ways. We also have very blue collar, like firefighter academy. We have a law enforcement academy. We have welding and highly technical computer science programs. And so really expanding those to offer, AI is a really big deal now. One of the things that I ultimately decided, instead of having an AI academy, is I think AI is going to impact every single industry. So part of the 4 E's in general, AI will be a part of that instead of having it as an isolated field or pathway within itself. I think it's going to impact so many, and if not every single industry, that I owe it to our students to make sure that it is infused into everything we do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Recently, there's been a movement advocating for reduced homework or even eliminating it altogether. What are your thoughts on this, and how do you think it impacts student learning and overall well-being?
I will tell you that I'm torn on that one because I do understand that not everyone goes home to an environment that is conducive for homework. I often have to explain to families that when I make decisions, it's not about their personal how their lives are lived, and I have to think of the 42,000, 43,000 students that we have in our district. Many of them go home. We have many students that go home and they are taking care of younger siblings. We have many students that go home that are dealing with all sorts of things that are happening in their homes that are not conducive to completing homework, whether, whatever it may be. And we have many students that can go home and it's absolutely fine. Their parents are supportive of homework and their parents can help them and their parents speak the language that they're learning in, et cetera, and can do that. So I'm kind of torn. I have always been a pretty self-starter and a learner of my own. Much of my learning have come self-paced as I read. I'm an avid reader. I love to read things, and most of that's done on my off time outside of work, same way when I was in school. But I do think we're going to have to find a balance to where students are expected. We're creating an environment where students want to learn. One of our Portrait of a Graduate promises is to be a lifelong learner. And I think that requires you to take initiative outside of just your school day in order to continue learning. But I think we're ultimately going to have to get to a point to where it's not mandated that learning occurs after school. That being said, there are certain things that we as a society, as a educational system, also will need to take on with that. As long as we have high stakes accountability, as long as we're held to these standards to where kids are measured on a test that they're given one day out of the year that determines whether or not they're successful, whether it determines whether or not their teachers are successful or school's successful, that's going to have to be looked at as well because there's only so much time in the day. And if we want our kids to be well-rounded and have a variety, we want to have programs where you can learn to have podcasts and all of that and not just math, reading, all of those things, which we all realize are important to creating well-rounded human beings. We're going to have to find a balance in order to ensure that we can do that and have all of the required content without necessarily requiring kids to be measured on these things that are so linear and will define their success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, I love learning outside of school. Both of them, though, I'll yap about something for hours.
Yeah.
And most of that is, basically all of it is just from podcasts or YouTube or, reading things on my own, whether, again, it's online or a book. But I like learning things that are interesting to me, intrigue me, even if they're related to a class. Like I've been, researching, particle physics because it came up in chemistry. But I feel like homework, I don't know, it feels more like work than learning that. And I get it's practicing skills, but I don't know. It just feels I'm not engaged very much when I do homework, so it makes it really difficult.
It seems almost punitive to many students, and I think many times it is. It's unfortunately. I mean, if I'm being required to do something when my home environment, not only in your situation, it doesn't interest me, but my home environment may not even allow it to occur.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really, I shouldn't be judged and graded on the fact that I wasn't able to complete an assignment when my home lifestyle requires me to do so much more outside of school hours.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Well, as we move on to legislation, as Kentucky legislation session comes to a close, several bills have been proposed that could impact education, and hopefully discuss a few. First, we come to Senate Bill 19. This bill introduces a moment of silence in schools, mentioning the Lord's Prayer and allowing for 60 minutes off-campus morality sessions. However, it doesn't define what morality entails. How do you think this affecting students, parents, and bothering school communities?
well, I will tell you, I think it's a slippery slope. I've heard the side that, and I myself, I identify as a Christian. I've and I've heard, our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian values, et cetera. But and even if one believes that to be the case, whether it's, a fact or not, the fact is we have a very multicultural and diverse community and country as we currently sit, and also the founders of our nation made it very clear that there should be a separation of church and state. And I think when a moment of silence is fine, I think whether or not you choose to pray to your God or you choose to just sit and reflect, I think that's been proven to be a good centering piece, just to have a moment of peace within yourself. But I think when we start introducing things like the Lord's Prayer and morality moments, I think that really creates an issue, because what morality looks like to you may not look the same to me, and who's to say I'm correct and you're wrong, or vice versa. And I think it really creates a system in a school system where it's more divisive and than it is bringing people together. And so I'm not necessarily for it, especially that extra hour, not to mention the amount of just how it will impact the structure of the day. The way the bill is currently written is kids will get that 1 hour if they want to go off campus for a morality hour or whatever they're doing, and kids who don't leave have to do something at school outside of what you're already doing. You guys already know your days are already full with things that you have to learn and you enjoy doing. And so in order to have that, the only option is to add another hour onto the day, because there's no time in the day to find it. And I think that will impact so many different things. And so I'm not overall for the bill. I don't think it will really benefit kids, our educational system as a whole. So that's my overall take on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the way I understand it, it could just be like, say, if you're going to go the, Sam Harris moral landscape route, you could just have somebody say, well, there's effectively a landscape of morality, and, there are different peaks in this that different people want to attain. The Taliban's peak is probably going to be different from your peak, which is going to be different from somebody else's peak. And, you can argue whether that's good or bad, but there are, just different things. But also, yeah, I can definitely see how this could go wrong very easily.
And very quickly.
Oh, yeah.
Especially where the bill in one part is not specific about, where it is very specific about what that time is used for, specifically mentioning the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
How will that impact other people's beliefs?
Exactly. And so I think we have to, from what I assume is most of these people that are signed on to this possibly are thinking from their own moral compass and not thinking that differs across our Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. And it's going to really create an issue when I may not necessarily want to say the Lord's Prayer. I may want to recite a Buddhist chant. Or I may want to pray, bow to the direction that Muslims when they there's so many, and it could be I'm completely, I'm not religious at all, so I want to do something else that I've created with it. I mean, it's such a slippery slope. I think it's not something that should be part of a public school system. We do have private schools for that reason. If families so choose to do that, they have every right to do so. And I respect that wholeheartedly, but I think as part of the school system, it's just not a good idea. And so I'm not in favor of that law. Of course, as superintendent, I have to implement whatever law is ultimately passed, but I've really made it very clear that that's not something I think is what's best for our school system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I feel like it would be relatively difficult to implement that. Like, wouldn't that require the creation of all of these different times at the very least, or finding these people to give these talks? vetting them somehow. And I mean, yeah, how would you vet them? You know, what metric are you using? You'd have to create.
And who
all that.
defines morality?
Yeah.
You know? And so it's written in a way to where someone has to define it. It hadn't been defined in the bill, and so it becomes, and ultimately it's in the eye of the beholder. You know, what's moral to me may not be moral to you, and vice versa. So, and I can't necessarily say I'm right and you're wrong just because I think I'm right and I think you're wrong. And so it's a very slippery slope, and I'm hoping that there's some changes made to it while there's still time.
All right. There is Senate Bill 83 as well. Sorry, this bag is. This bill addresses the uses of KEYS scholarship funds for non-certified schools. How might this change impact funding distribution and access to post-secondary education for Kentucky students?
Well, there is a finite amount of dollars that our state has, and I think we need to realize that whenever one decides to spend money on one thing or extra monies here, it's going to impact where you can spend money elsewhere. And that's just simple math. There's not, whether or not I agree with it being allowed to go to uncertified schools or not, I think it is a simple matter of mathematics. You can't be all things to all people and expect for it to work. Someone's going to get less somewhere down the road. And ultimately, in this case, it would be our public school kids, many of whom depend on this in order to take advantage of dual credit classes, take advantage of career and technical education courses. And so I think it's something that I'd really caution the legislature on doing. And also at the same time, there's a bill to reduce the income tax, which is bringing in less dollars for the state as well. And so I think there's something to look at there to make sure that it's not going to have any unintended consequences, because ultimately I think it's going to cause many of our students who may have opportunities now to not have those opportunities simply because the funding isn't there. I love the fact that as a Commonwealth that we're able to provide KEYS dollars to our students. But I also think that we need to really take a close look at how those are being utilized, and are they being utilized effectively now, and how mathematically and financially it would impact spreading those even more thin.
There's also Senate Bill 268. This legislation focuses on virtual education. In your opinion, how would this bill impact students in traditional schools, and could it lead to a greater shift towards online learning?
This is another one where I'm a bit torn. I will tell you, I think education, one good thing that came out of the pandemic was we had to try to reinvent what education looked like, and which had not happened in over a century. And quite honestly, after the pandemic, we quickly shifted back to traditional education for the most part. It was once said that if our founding fathers were to wake up today and come to the U.S. and see what was currently happening, that the only thing they would still recognize was a classroom. We still have kids basically sitting in rows for the most part, a teacher up teaching. There'd be a few changes. We have technology, we have one-to-one, but it's still, for the most part, it looks more like anything else in our society than any other thing in our society. It's changed the least. And so when it comes to online learning, virtual learning, I do think it is a shift that is happening. I remember years ago, probably before you guys were born, when there were colleges first began to offer online classes, fully online degrees and all of that. It started out with the University of Phoenix, or it was the first that I knew of. And I was a principal at the time. And I had a superintendent that had his doctoral degree was from the University of Phoenix. And it was almost whispered like, oh my gosh, he has an online degree, because it was not considered a real degree, because it was so different and so odd. And now you're hard pressed to be able to get any degree without some online course as part of it. And so it's just a shift in the way things work. I don't think it works for everyone. And in fact, now we have, we as Fayette County, we have an online virtual academy. And we have less than 1% of our students participate in it. And it used to be, when I came into the district during the pandemic, it started, and it was kindergarten through 12th grade. And I made the decision to have it start in 6th grade, simply because I just don't think you can learn to read online. That's just a very difficult thing to do. And there's such foundational skills. I'm biased. I'm a very social person. I still remember I still remember my 2nd grade teacher, who I think solidified my reading. I still remember the smell of her perfume. And so it's a very personal experience when learning to read. It's relational as human beings, and so I just don't understand how a young child can do that, which is the foundation of all learning, is reading. So we're not offering it at that level. But I do think also that we need to look at how we're going to transform education in general. If it works for kids, and it does work for some, why not offer that to them? So I think that particular bill that we're referencing was really due to a particular school system who was taking in kids from all over the state, teaching them online, just for funding purposes and not necessarily for learning purposes, which is not the case. We only take students that would be in Fayette County anyway in ours, so it won't impact us in any way. But I'm open to exploring how online learning can be more impactful in our school system.
Mm-hmm. I know you mentioned the design of classrooms and how schooling is taught. We have, collabs and breakout rooms here. I feel that they're a little underutilized. I don't know how much of that is due to the curriculum or just how the teachers were taught to teach. But would those be implemented in other schools in the future? Are you looking into that, or?
Yeah, in fact, we have all of our new buildings that are being built. I was just touring with a bunch of legislatures a couple of weeks ago, our new middle school that's coming open this coming fall. And it has breakout rooms on every single hallway, to where teachers can get out of their traditional classrooms and have kids in an environment that is completely different than a classroom setting. It was also built with courtyards where you can do that outside and do that as well. I think true learning really has to take place everywhere. As you guys know, it's some of the most, you talked about earlier, Felix, about some of the things you do outside of school and how that's most impactful to you and your learning. And I think we need to provide opportunities for kids to learn in a variety of environments. Not every kid's going to learn sitting at a desk on a laptop or with pen and paper. Some kids are going to learn by being in nature and touching and feeling and doing things. Other kids are going to learn by being able to design things or being able to sit up and speak and act out something. And so I think the more we can get outside of the traditional classroom environment, and whether that be online, it's just, we need to get to a point in education where education looks like every other part of society, that there's a variety of ways to learn, there's a variety of ways to show that you've learned something, and there's a variety of ways to be successful. And so I'm very open to transformation in education. I think it's absolutely necessary and absolutely something that we're going to have to continue to look at. It's difficult when, you're right, you mentioned that's how teachers are taught to teach in college, and to get away from not only teaching our teachers to teach differently, but while they're getting their training, but once they get into schools, saying, okay, we're going to do these things differently as well while here through professional learning and growth.
Mm-hmm. One other thing that I've experienced with that is that a lot of the things that I learn doesn't ever really show up on tests at school. I might have knowledge that relates to whatever we're learning, especially in history and things. But I like learning about philosophy or esotericism or mysticism, things like that. And even on the SAT, I don't think I'm ever going to have a question that's asking about the Baal cycle or anything like that. And from what I understand, I think that's sort of a symptom of teaching to the test that I won't really ever experience. I feel I won't ever experience that knowledge coming into use. I think I have been able to use it on projects here, though, so that's wonderful. But what do you think about that not necessarily applying to tests or schoolwork?
Again, I think one of the worst things we've done, and it was well intended, I get that, but the high stakes accountability and testing to measure success of students or measure success of teachers or schools or districts, it has been an epic failure. I think what we've done is we've created a system where we want kids to test well. We haven't created a system where we want kids to be well-rounded and to be high-performing citizens that can contribute back to society. And I think it's suffered. You'll hear most of our legislators will say, look at these test scores. We have kids that can't read. We have kids that can't do basic math. And the simple fact is we have kids who are not expert test takers. But we have some kids that are doing brilliant things every single day that very well may never be measured on a test. I mean, the fact that you guys are sitting here now doing this, I would have no idea how to put on a podcast and sit here and ask these questions. And the fact that you're all sophomores and are asking me about the legislation and bills that are being passed is something no one's ever going to test you on that. No one's ever going to test you on your knowledge of being able to control these devices and to be able to sit and speak with the superintendent of schools and be as confident as you guys are in doing so. No one's going to ask someone, going to be tested on them being able to perform on a stage in front of hundreds of people. So it is so unfortunate that we've gone to a point to where schools are measured by a test that is given on one day out of the whole school year to say whether or not they're successful. And so I think that absolutely needs to change. I think it's absolutely a disservice to students, to educators, to our families, to our community as a whole, because we do produce very well-rounded kids, as you guys are. And I think we're at a point to where our society is ready to move on to show that our students are learning and our students are doing things that will never be measured, that are important. I actually, to close out with something funny, I saw a clip where it was a guy on his deathbed, and he was dying, his family's around, and he's about to go and meet his maker or whatever, and he stops in the middle of everyone crying and all of that and say, wait. I just want to acknowledge I've lived 97 years and I never, ever had to do Algebra 1. And then he croaked. It was just, in all of life, it was like I never used the skills I learned in Algebra 1. And I do understand there's some foundational skills that, everyone needs to learn. But, I mean, there's so many more things that I think are important as an educator and someone that's dedicated my life to education and educating others. There's so much more important in creating a productive human being than the core things that are tested on a test that someone chooses. These are important enough for us to ask a kid.
Mm-hmm. As we move on to the current administration of the United States, in the current administration, there's a push to close the Department of Education. What are your thoughts on this action?
I think it's extremely unfortunate. I am a believer that as a society, and of course, education belongs to the states. That's written in the Constitution. It's very clear. And 90% of education is done by the states. But I do think as a society, we owe it as a nation to have some influence on what is taught in our schools, or how we're funding our schools. And we just simply don't have the funding out elsewhere. The Department of Education has been critical in providing special education services to our students with disabilities that learn differently. It's been critical in ensuring that people of every background and ethnicity and language are able to go to a public school and learn and have the resources that they need. It's been critical in ensuring that kids that can't necessarily afford to eat have a lunch and a breakfast where they can, be able to focus on their learning. And there's so many things, I think, as a society, that having a education department at a national level is important, that the states simply just do not have the funding in order to do it. We have some very wealthy states, and we have some poor states. And Kentucky actually happens to be on one of the poorer states in our nation. And we depend very heavily on federal funding to ensure that our students are getting every opportunity that they can. And I think it's quite unfortunate that we're going that route. I think it's going to have some irreparable harm, unfortunately, to many students. And unfortunately, it'll probably be the students that are the most vulnerable, our students that, our students with special needs that really depend on many of the services, our students that are, in need of additional support, our poor students that need, those meals in order to make sure that they, if you're hungry, that's the only thing you're thinking about. I'm not thinking about learning, my, Algebra 1, for example, or, reading Shakespeare, or I'm worried about getting something in my belly. I just can't think about it. And so there's so many things. It's unfortunate that we find ourselves here. Obviously, it will take a act of Congress in order to ultimately do away with it, which I'm not sure how that vote would go in this current political climate. But I do think it's unfortunate that is the route we're taking to try to impact education. It's just unfortunate in my mind.
Mm-hmm. I know there's been generally over time like a shift towards being against the Department of Education, because Bush Jr. was, his whole thing was no child left behind, and of course you also had other presidents such as Reagan who didn't want the Department of Education, but I don't know, it seems to have gone back to that stance of, in the political climate of we shouldn't have a federal agency for education.
Yeah, I think there's a complete misunderstanding of what the responsibility of the Department of Education is. There's very few policies, I will tell you as a superintendent of the second largest school system in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there's very few policies that are implemented statewide that come from the feds. Most of that is done at the state level, as it should. And so to imply that having a federal oversight is somehow hurting the local policies and control of the state is just simply not true. The only thing that the federal does is to ensure the Office of Civil Rights, for example, is that no one's civil rights are being violated. If that occurs, then there's an Office of Education that can come in and say, no, absolutely, you need to provide this service to this child. For example, we as a state, there's not one state bill that allows us to feed or provides us the funding to feed children. Those all come from the state and to provide food. There's no law that states you must feed children while they're in school. It's just simply because the federal Department of Education provides those funds. Actually, it's through the Department of Agriculture as well. But it is something that we do because we know it's important. And there's kids, again, with disabilities. I can't stress that enough because I think they're one of the most vulnerable populations that will be impacted by this, that you must teach children with disabilities. And quite often that cost a lot more dollars. We have kids that are extremely medically fragile that may have a one-on-one nurse. There's just no way state funding can afford those kids to have the nurse without having that federal backing from it, and to ensure. Otherwise, as far as the state concerned, is you may not necessarily have to even educate those children, which is unfortunate. So I just think this is an unfortunate development, and I'm completely against it, and I think it's going to be harmful to so many children in so many ways.
Looking ahead to the next 4 years, what are your top priorities as superintendent to ensure the success of Fayette County Public Schools?
Well, I've already mentioned my 4 E's once I remembered all 4 of them. But also looking even at the other end of the spectrum, looking at our early childhood education. One of the things that we have that has been problematic is our students, when we receive our students in kindergarten, we actually give a pre-screener to see how many of our students are ready day one for kindergarten when they come. Do they have the prerequisite skills in order to be successful from day one in kindergarten? And one of the things that we found since the implementation of this screening is about 50% of our kids on average come to us on day one not ready for kindergarten. And so when we talk about the achievement gap when they're in third grade or when they're graduating and are right at graduation age, we realized that didn't start when they were in kindergarten. That didn't start when it started well before they came to us. And so one of the things that I'm really invested in is ensuring that our families, who are our first teachers and educators of children, know exactly what they should be doing and have the resources that they need in order to impact students well before they get to us in kindergarten. 90% of a child's brain is developed before kindergarten. And so there's simple things that families can do in order to make sure that their kids are ready. I mean, it's simple as reading to your child, allowing your child to go out and play and explore, and then just speaking to them and having conversations with them so that they can learn language. And so there's a variety of different things that are just simple things that families can do well before. And it's not that families don't want their children to be prepared for kindergarten. Quite often they don't know what to do, or they don't have the resources in order to do it. So my big goal is to ensure that we continue to partner with our community, whether that be our libraries, with our city government, whether it's our universities, our hospitals, our pediatricians, to have every opportunity to educate our families to say, your child's 3 years old. You should be doing this with your child in order to make sure that by kindergarten that they're ready to go forward. Your child's 2 years old. You should be doing this. And again, it's very simple things. I mean, a kid coming to kindergarten should be able to know that words, when you read a book, that there's words in there, and those words mean something. They say something to someone. They should know what the front of a book is, how to open a book, where and so a variety of different things that they should know how to speak to each other. And if they don't, that also helps us realize if a kid is not developing at a level at second grade, it also says go to your pediatrician. There may be some delays. There may be some special needs there. And so really just I want to make sure that we empower our families so that we can, once they're starting in kindergarten, our teachers can really start and take away that gap, and so that we can continue to make sure that our students are performing once they get here and having every advantage to excel in school.
Mm-hmm. I know we've talked about various things, 4Es, breakout rooms, different the ways that teachers are taught to teach. Will the 4Es be? And I understand if this is sort of a rough outline that you have in your head, but will the 4Es be in a similar position to the habits at STEAM or for the district, where they're there and it's good to prove them? However, I personally feel, and let me know if you all do as well, but I feel they're not they kind of just get brought up, and especially with the district thing, since we also have our own, they're definitely important, but I feel they're not ingrained into the structure of teaching as much as they might be able to, and I think that might help people. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I will tell you, I think saying something is less important than doing it. For example, we have the AAAs now. I've had that as an initiative for the last couple of years. No one's probably heard of that but our principals and our leadership team. But our data shows that we're actually taking advantage of it, and it's being implemented. The 4As are advanced academics, ensuring that our students are getting more opportunities to be in advanced coursework, to have more rigorous courses. The second A is academics in general, to ensure that we're increasing everyone's academic achievement and narrowing the achievement gap. And the last A is attendance, ensuring that attendance after the pandemic, attendance really suffered tremendously. And so ensuring that we are getting kids to school. And it's not something we plaster everywhere. These are the AAAs, this is what we're doing. But when we look at our data, and it is something that is certainly happening. And so I think the 4Es will be the exact same way. It's not something that I think necessarily students need to be aware of. This is something we're trying to do. But our data should certainly reflect the fact that students are graduating and they're either employed or enrolled or entrepreneurship or enlisted. And so and that's what matters most. Whether anyone can name what the 4Es are or not, or the AAAs, is less important than is it impacting our kids. And so I think that's the best way to implement any system or any process. I can't necessarily, quote the I can't quote the preamble of the Constitution, but the Constitution as a whole and what all that's in there. But we know as a nation what we stand for as a nation. We know what it's about, and it's implemented in our day-to-day lives. And so I think that's what's most important when it comes to things like that. And so it won't necessarily be plastered everywhere and everyone saying, oh, we have this new 4E initiative or E4 or whatever I end up calling it. But we should see it in the data as it's being implemented, and it should be impacting students' lives. And I think that's actually the best way to implement anything is out of action more so than words.
Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of GovCast. You've had amazing answers, and thank you for coming out.
Well, thank you guys. You guys are quite impressive. I'm happy to be here. I'm happy to be invited, and hopefully you'll invite me back again.
Yeah.
You guys make this easy.
That would be awesome.
Awesome.
All righty. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that went well.
Yeah, it did. I think he was really insightful with everything he said, from the 4-H program to the new middle school they're building with all the collabs.
Oh, yeah.
Not 4-H, 4E.
4E.
Yeah.
Any comments?
No, I think he had some awesome information that we were able to get, and he was really insightful on topics that I personally was not very knowledgeable about. And it's always awesome to get to talk to someone who has that extra step of information. They've been working with the topic that you're talking about for so long. It's just awesome to get to talk to people who have that amount of knowledge.
Definitely.
That was an insightful conversation with Dr. Liggins. We appreciate his time and expertise. Until next time, this has been GovCast.